Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to completely transform how you look at cost management. If you're sitting there thinking this is just dry, dusty accounting, think again. Cost management is actually the ultimate high-tech dashboard for driving your business. It's exactly how leaders make those absolutely critical decisions that separate thriving companies from the ones left in the dust. So get ready, because we are going to build your ultimate business dashboard right now.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're hitting 5 quick pit stops: the dashboard, cost classifications, tracking costs, overhead and capacity, and lastly, lean operations. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. The Cost Management Dashboard.
Think about a race car driver for a second. To actually win a race, they need way more than just a speedometer, right? They're constantly looking at tire temp, fuel levels, engine RPM. Cost management gives you, the manager, those exact same critical dials. It's not just this backwards-looking gauge of, hey, what did we spend? Instead, it's tracking the few things that literally drive your success, like keeping costs low, quality high, and delivery lightning fast.
Now, the whole foundation of those dials comes down to 2 concepts that sound kind of similar but are totally different: effectiveness versus efficiency. Effectiveness, that's just crossing the finish line. Like, did we hit our goal of $1 million profit? Yes or no. But efficiency, that's all about how we got there. Did we use the absolute minimum amount of resources to do it, like maybe only spending $500,000 in labor and materials? Because let's be real, you can absolutely be effective without being efficient. Cost management makes sure you hit both.
Moving on to Section 2, Decoding Cost Classifications. Okay, so when we look at spending, costs basically fall into 2 distinct buckets. First up, we've got product costs. These are directly tied to actually making the thing, like the wood used to build a chair, or the direct labor to put it together. These costs literally travel with the product and sit on your balance sheet as inventory until it's sold. On the flip side, we have period costs. These are completely separate from production. Think advertising or administrative salaries. They don't travel, they just get expensed immediately right on the income statement.
We also really need to understand how these costs behave based on activity levels. Fixed costs stay totally constant in total within what we call a relevant range. Think of it like your monthly apartment rent. You pay the exact same amount whether you sleep there 10 nights or 30. Variable costs, though, those increase directly in proportion to your volume. That's kind of like buying $3 coffee cups. Your total cost completely depends on exactly how many cups you decide to buy.
And that brings us right into traceability. Direct costs are super easy. They can be traced straight to a specific cost object. If you're building a car, the steel is a direct cost, hands down. But indirect costs, now that's your factory rent or the supervisor's salary, you can't just look at one single car and say, oh yeah, that used precisely 3% of the factory rent, right? Indirect costs are overhead, and figuring them out takes some pretty tricky math to assign properly.
But here's the real kicker. It's not just about the costs that are sitting on your books, it's about the ones that aren't. Opportunity cost is the benefit you give up by choosing one option over the next best alternative. So why does this matter? Well, because managers so often obsess over sunk costs, money that's already spent and cannot be recovered. Sunk costs are literally just crying over spilled milk. They are completely irrelevant for making future decisions. Opportunity cost is what you actually need to consider to steer the business.
Section 3. Tracking and accumulating costs. All right, when we actually apply these costs to products, we generally look at 3 main methods: standard, normal, and actual. Standard costing is a huge one, and a major exam favorite, by the way. It uses standard rates and quantities for everything. You're basically setting a should cost per unit right at the beginning of the period. This is incredibly powerful because it lets you record costs immediately and analyze variances without sitting around waiting for actual invoices to show up. Actual costing, it's almost never used, simply because waiting until the end of the month to figure out your costs is way too slow for any fast-moving business.
So how do we accumulate those costs? Well, it entirely depends on your product. If you make totally unique custom items, like bespoke furniture or handle distinct legal cases, you're going to use job order costing. You just track the costs by the specific client job. But if you're mass-producing thousands of identical items, like gallons of paint or bottles of soda, you use process costing. Since units are always in different stages of completion at any given time, process costing brilliantly uses this concept called equivalent units to convert partially finished goods into whole unit equivalents. It makes the math so much easier.
Section 4. Tackling overhead and capacity.
Okay, picture this high-stakes scenario.
How on earth do you accurately divide a massive factory rent bill among 1,000 completely different products? Traditional methods usually just slap a single plant-wide rate on everything, maybe based on direct labor hours. But think about it. If one product is highly complex and another is incredibly simple, that single rate is going to severely distort your product costs. You could end up pricing your products completely wrong, and that's a disaster.
So the fix for that massive distortion is activity-based costing, or ABC. Instead of just using one giant overhead pool, you first pinpoint the specific activities happening, things like machine setups or quality inspections. Then, you assign resource costs to those activities. And finally, you assign those activity costs directly to the products based on how much of that specific activity they actually consumed. If you have a low-volume product that needs tons of custom setups, ABC makes sure it gets hit with that higher cost, giving you a perfectly accurate dashboard.
Now, it's fascinating how accounting rules can literally change your reported profits depending on whether you use absorption costing or variable costing. The only difference here is how they handle fixed manufacturing overhead. Absorption costing treats it as a product cost, which is required by GAAP, while variable costing treats it as a period cost for internal use. So what, right? Well, if you produce way more than you sell, absorption costing takes some of that fixed overhead and actually stores it in inventory on the balance sheet. This artificially inflates your operating income for that period. Managers absolutely need to know this, or they'll get completely fooled by their own financial statements.
Now, when we apply that overhead, we have to pick a capacity level. Now, theoretical capacity, that's practically impossible. It assumes zero downtime ever. Normal capacity is required for external reporting. But the absolutely crucial point here is choosing between master budget and practical capacity for internal pricing. If you use master budget capacity and demand drops, your expected output shrinks, which mathematically skyrockets your overhead rate per unit. If you then raise your prices to cover that, guess what? Demand drops even more. It's this fatal downward demand spiral. That is exactly why practical capacity, meaning what the plant can attainably produce, is your best bet for pricing. It keeps those unused capacity costs completely isolated.
Finally, Section 5. Lean Operations and Quality.
Lean thinking basically revolves around defining what the customer actually values, and then ruthlessly eliminating any waste they wouldn't want to pay for. The absolute key principle here is pull. This is where concepts like just-in-time manufacturing and Kanban cards step in. Instead of just pushing products down the line based on a wild guess, downstream stations send a visual signal, a pull, requesting materials exactly when they need them. This drops your inventory carrying costs to near zero and exposes any defects almost instantly. And speaking of defects, we really have to look at the cost of quality. You've got prevention and appraisal. Those are your costs of conformance. That's your training, your inspections, basically making sure you do things right the first time. Then you have internal and external failures, which are your costs of non-conformance. We're talking scrap, rework, and worst of all, lawsuits and lost reputation from those external failures out in the market. The profound takeaway here, investing heavily upfront in that prevention slice drastically shrinks that massive, reputation-destroying external failure cost later on. We're closing out our toolkit today with this really powerful philosophy, Kaizen. It's the Japanese term for continuous improvement. We're not talking about some radical, disruptive re-engineering here. It's a culture where everyone is constantly looking for small, incremental ways to do things better, every single day. People often mistakenly think that focusing on quality slows you down. But Kaizen actually proves the exact opposite. Better quality increases your productivity because you completely eliminate that hidden factory of rework and scrap.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. If cost management truly is the high-tech GPS and dashboard for your business, what hidden inefficiencies are you currently driving right past? Seriously, are your overhead rates hiding the truth? Are you just ignoring opportunity costs? Think about how you can use these exact dials, activity-based costing, practical capacity, lean principles, to course-correct your own business today. Thanks so much for joining me, and I hope you're leaving fully equipped to take the wheel.